I'm Megan Gibson.
And I'm Ann Spain.
And we're from the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning at Ferris State University. This video is about active learning. In this video, we're going to talk about what active learning is, give some examples of active learning strategies, and talk about why it matters.
So what is active learning? Cynthia Brame published a helpful guide to active learning, and in this guide she provides several published definitions of active learning, boiling them all down to one simple definition, that active learning includes activities that students do to construct knowledge and understanding. These activities usually will involve students doing higher order levels of thinking, and sometimes include metacognition, which is students thinking or learning about their own learning, and the process of how it's happening. This can be important, providing the link between the activity they're doing and the how and what of what they are learning. The learning theory that supports active learning as an educational tool is provided in one word in this definition, and that is construct. The theory is constructivism, and this theory maintains that the learning of new knowledge is something that occurs when it's constructed or built from pre-existing knowledge, and that this building of knowledge occurs actively rather than passively. And the definition of active learning is broad enough that a wide variety of activities can fall within it, ranging from very simple and easy to implement to more complex, which might often require more time, more thought, and more planning to implement. We'll take a very brief look at some of these activities now, ranging from simple to complex, but remember that a lot of these are included in your pocket guide for evidence-based instruction.
Our first example of an active learning strategy is a minute paper. Minute papers can be done either at the end or beginning of a class period. You would ask a question like, what was the most important thing you learned during this class? Or, what important question remains unanswered? Students would write for 1 or 2 minutes and hand in their responses. You would read the responses and provide feedback to the students. A Think, Pair, Share involves posing a question to the class. Instead of asking students to respond immediately, you first give them a minute or a couple of minutes to think about the question on their own. Then you have them pair with another student nearby and ask them to discuss their thoughts. Finally, ask pairs to share what they discussed with the whole class. A Think, Pair, Share allows students time to process their thoughts before sharing with the whole class and can make them more comfortable doing so. Concept maps can be created by students individually, or they can work in pairs or small groups. A major concept is placed at the center of the concept map, and lines are drawn to other concepts. The goal of a concept map is for students to see the relationships between concepts. This is good when we expect students to make connections, but content has been delivered in a linear fashion. In a Send a Problem activity, students work in small groups. You would give each group a topic on which to base their question and an index card. On the front of the card, they would write their question, and on the back, they would write their answer. The questions are passed from group to group. Each group reads the question and works to come up with an answer, and then checks their answer with what is written on the back of the card. This is a great way to review for an exam. Guided notes or skeletal notes can involve providing students with an outline of a lecture with blank spaces inserted for writing down some information. Alternatively, guided note-taking documents can be shared with students for them to write down key concepts and examples. Guided notes can help students synthesize or summarize content and recognize which pieces of information are most important for them to know. In a jigsaw activity, students work in small groups to learn about a topic, with each small group learning about a different topic. Then the students form new groups, with one group member from each of the original groups. In these new groups, each group member teaches the group about what they learned in their original group.
Thanks, Megan. So next, we're going to look at why this matters, or what the impact of active learning interventions have been shown to be. In a 2014 study by Scott Freeman and colleagues, they looked at the research question, does active learning boost exam scores? Does it lower failure rates? This was a meta-analysis of 225 studies that compared traditional lecturing to active learning classrooms. The studies that were identified excluded any interventions that assessed the impact of active learning outside of the class, such as outside of class quizzes, lab projects, or homework assignments. The studies were required to compare performance using scores on identical or formally equivalent exams or other assessments. What they found across all STEM disciplines and overall was that active learning led to both an increase in exam performance, as shown by this G, which is a statistical measure of effect size, as well as a decrease in failure rate. In another study conducted by Sarah Eddy and Kelly Hogan, which was published in 2014, they sought to investigate whether increased active learning and course structure works to improve academic achievement, especially for specific groups of students, including disadvantaged students, first-generation students, and Black students. There were 3 structured elements that were included in their experiment. These were guided reading questions, which were given before class for students to prepare, in-class activities for students to do during class, as well as review assignments that were provided for students following class. There were 3 different levels of course structure that were identified, with 3 different levels of active learning included in them, as well as different amounts of course structure: low, moderate, and high. Courses with low structure were lecture heavy and had no or little pre-class assignments, active learning, and post-lecture review assignments. Courses that had moderate structure included some active learning during the class and provided pre- and post-lecture assignments sometimes that were offered as optional. And then highly structured courses had a lot of active learning during the class session, as well as pre- and post-lecture assignments offered to students more than once a week. The analysis of exam performance in these 3 different groups showed that the highly structured courses were the most beneficial to all students, and this highly structured course disproportionately benefited Black and first-generation students, having the achievement gap for the former and completely eliminating this achievement or equity gap for first-generation college students. In another study, which was a meta-analysis of 26 individual experimental studies, authors Theobald and colleagues measured the effect of active learning on failure rates in courses, as well as the effect of active learning overall on equity gaps. To be included in the study, or in this meta-analysis, it had to be taught by the same instructor and use the same exams, thus keeping active learning as the only variable that was manipulated. The authors looked at equity gaps for minoritized groups in STEM, and what they found was that there was a disproportionate benefit to these minoritized groups. There was a 33% decrease in the equity gap in exam scores for the overall class average compared to MGS, which they call the minoritized groups, which were low-income students, as well as Black, Latinx, and Native American students. Equity gaps, again, were reduced by 33% in exam scores, as well as 45% in those that were passing the course by the end. The authors also sought to identify variables that explained the variation that was observed in the averages of these 26 studies, and what they found was that the amount of active learning most explained this variance, especially for courses that had a lot of active learning, like the study we previously talked about. Equity gaps were reduced by 76% in these courses compared to a passive learning experience. So in summary, Active learning improves exam scores. It lowers failure rates, especially for underrepresented groups, and a lot is better than a little. Finally, we want to note that the authors of this last study put forth that how we implement active learning matters. They write that inclusive teaching emphasizes treating students with dignity and respect, communicating confidence in their ability to meet high standards, and demonstrates a genuine interest in their intellectual and personal growth and success. The authors refer to this as the head and hearts hypothesis, and that both cognitive and social and emotional, or head and heart elements, are especially important for underrepresented groups of students who might often struggle due to economic and educational disparities prior to college, as well as experiencing social and psychological barriers like stereotype and microaggressions.
Thank you for watching our video.